Child's Play came out in 1988 and it took our visceral fear of dolls and gave us something to really be scared about. And as good as certain killer doll movies can be nowadays, they don't hold the same impact on us like Child's Play did. And despite the fact that Child's Play is still getting sequels to this day, Orion Studios has decided to make a remake of the first movie. And this begs the question, is it able to recapture the fear that the original gave us? We are about to find out. Let the battle commence. The story for the original Child's Play opens with a criminal called Charles Lee Ray who is running away from a cop. He retreats into a toy store and he gets shot. In his last few moments, however, he transfers his soul into a doll using the magic of voodoo. This causes lightning to strike the store and Charles Lee Ray is found dead, with the scene ending on an extended shot of the doll. We are then taken to a boy named Andy Barkley and his mother. She is a single parent who's struggling financially, and it just so happens that Andy wants this expensive good guy doll that his mother can't afford. One day when she's at work, she gets word from a friend that some homeless dude on the street has a good guy doll and that they can get it for a cheap price. She does just that and gives the doll to Andy. Very shortly after, however, strange things start happening around Andy, and the characters eventually come to the realization that the doll is possessed with the soul of Charles Lee Ray, and his goal is to transfer his soul into Andy's body or else he will be trapped in the doll forever. From here, Chucky tries his hardest to come after Andy and kills anyone that gets in his way. And the story for the Child's Play remake is that, very much like the original, Andy's mother has financial issues, so she brings home a doll as a way for them to have some fun. Andy turns Chucky on and the two start to grow a friendly connection. Soon, however, due to his tampered programming, the doll becomes so dead set on playing with Andy that when Andy starts getting distracted with friends, family and even neighbors, Chucky doesn't know what else to do if he can't play, so he tries to rid Andy of all distractions so they can continue to be best friends. When Andy sees the horrific lengths that Chucky goes through, however, he turns his back on Chucky and Chucky becomes very violent and revenge driven, all in the name of fun and friendship. From here, Chucky goes on a killing spree and Andy and his friends try their very best to take him down. So, what did I think of the story for both movies? Well, the whole concept of Chucky being able to only transfer his soul into the body of the first person he tells his secret to is just a silly and convenient way of having him come after Andy. But on the whole, the story works and sells the idea of a psychotic killer doll coming after a kid, and it has scarred many kids in the process. As for the remake, well, first and foremost, it's just that, a remake, so it can't pull off the same fear that the original Child's Play did with its killer doll concept, and it's a fear that most people have already experienced and gotten over, so instead, it opts to go for a more fun approach, as it knows it can't replicate the fear that the original movie gave us. And one of the ways the movie tries to be fun is that it is very self-aware. It knows you're watching a Child's Play remake, and you can tell the filmmakers know how protective people are of the original, and that is reflected in the way this movie presents itself. Even the scene where Chucky gets his name is self-aware, and it very amusingly throws you off. And this movie takes a very different approach at developing Chucky. Whereas in the original film, he was a man in a doll's body, in this movie, he is just a normal doll that had his programming messed with when he was being manufactured at the factory. And in taking this angle, I personally saw Chucky in this movie very much in the same vein as E.T. and the Iron Giant, with the twist being, what if those things did not become good and became evil instead? That's how I saw this movie and its reinterpretation of Chucky, and it is the smartest change that I have ever seen in any of these horror remakes. It didn't just shamefully rip off the story of the original movie, and I have a lot of respect for it for that. So, which of the two movies had the superior story? Well, both stories are good, but the movie with the superior story is the original Child's Play. Although the remake has a lot of creative set pieces and story elements surrounding Chucky, the original movie has a very effective mystery element to it, and is filled with these really intense and tension-filled scenes that filled my stomach with so much butterflies the first time I saw it. And the scene where Andy's mother figures out that Chucky came with batteries but has been talking without them the whole time is a downright classic scene, and one that I always remember when I think back to this film. It's a revelation that hits you like a ton of bricks, and the music that plays during the scene really amps up the weight and tension of what we have just figured out, and it just goes to show that we would not have great set pieces like this if the story for the original wasn't the way it was, and the story constantly provides a ton of high quality payoff, and we don't have any scenes like that in the remake. Now that doesn't mean that the remake story is bad, it's just not as impactful or intense as the story for the original, and that's why the movie with the superior story is the original Child's Play. Now, Andy in the original is just a kid and therefore doesn't need a ton of development. I mean, he's too young to have a backstory yet, as he's got his whole life ahead of him. So all we need to know about him is this: is he a good kid or a bratty kid? And above all, can the kid act? And the answer to both of those is that he's a good kid, and yes, he can act. Now, there might be a moment or two where his delivery is incredibly bad.
Help me, Dr. Oddmore, Chucky's here!
But only seconds later, he gives this performance.
But Chucky is here! Then he's going to kill me! Kill me! Please don't leave me! Please!
I really want to touch on this as I don't feel like he gets enough credit. Alex Vincent, who plays Andy, really does an amazing job with his performance in this movie. Now, kid actors by default already have an innocence to them, but his performance adds another layer of innocence. And the movie is all the better for it, as it makes you feel sorry for him throughout the whole movie, and you are constantly rooting for him. Now, in the remake, Andy is played by Gabriel Bateman, and you might recognize him as the kid from Lights Out. And as I mentioned earlier, he plays a teenage Andy, and that means that he's too old for dolls. And he doesn't immediately just take the doll and start playing with it. There is a transitional period where he looks at the doll as a kid's toy that he is too old for, and then he eventually acquires a friendship with it. And I like that this movie didn't just give us a rehash version of Andy from the original. This character is completely different. And the same two questions apply. Is he a good kid or a bratty kid, and can he act? Well, yes, he can act extremely well. Is he a good kid or a bratty kid? Well, he's kind of both. He's a teenager, so emotionally he is a bit of a mess, but you can still understand where he's coming from. He gets upset and even emotes like a normal teenager would, and there is one scene in particular where he gets upset, and it was completely understandable. And much like Andy from the original, I was rooting for this kid. But unlike Andy from the original, he is partly to blame for Chucky becoming evil, and we'll talk more about that in the next segment. Then we get to Andy's mother, and I'm just gonna say it. I hate the mother in the remake. From a writing standpoint, she gives the usual cliched mum dialogue, which is, we talked about this, we moved here to have a fresh start, and all that nonsense. All they did was copy and paste that old dialogue and storyline and did absolutely nothing smart or clever with it. And when the mother is acting all stressed out, I thought it was unconvincing. The struggle she was going through with her job was far more convincing and real in the original movie, and you cared about her, because she seemed like a nice and down-to-earth person who is struggling, but still has the happiness of her kid as her top priority. Despite the harshness of reality, she clearly cared about motherhood. The mother in the remake, however, full on makes out with her boyfriend right in front of the frickin' house door and then acts surprised when Andy walks in and sees them. She also blackmails her boss so she can get her teenage son a doll, which was returned by a customer for being faulty, and not to mention, she is also weak. She doesn't properly stand up for her son when her douchebag boyfriend treats Andy like shit. She just says to him very softly, "You should talk to me and then I will talk to him. I think you are a bit hard." He wasn't a bit hard, he was being a thug. And to top things off, she even tells him, "Oh look, kids standing in the rain. That looks like fun. Go and play with them." I am not kidding. That's what she actually said. She really comes off as the I don't give a shit type of mother. Now I know what the argument is going to be. This is what single mothers are like nowadays. Well, Andy's mother in the original Child's Play was a single mother too, and she never pulled the rotten shit that the mother in the remake did. And if this is what single mothers are really like in this day and age, then they really need to take a history lesson and be more like this, and not like this. If this is any indication as to how people have progressed over the years, then we are only getting worse. Now, it's easy to say that the mother in the remake loves her son, but I just don't buy it. There was little to no chemistry between them. In the original, however, you could tell that she loved him. The way she would talk to him, the way she would humor him, and the very excited look she had on her face when she was watching him open his presents. This 100% felt like a real mother and son relationship. And unfortunately, that's not the case with the remake. Their relationship just isn't there. Next, we have Detective Mike Norris, and he is a very different character in both movies. In the original movie, he's the type of cop who wastes no time and gets straight to the point. And in the remake, he's very laid back and friendly. He certainly has his cop moments, but he's generally a more laid-back character who spends a lot of days with his mother. But besides that, he doesn't really have a variety of character traits besides being a laid-back cop. he's just too straightforward. The cop in the original would be very direct with his line of questioning to Andy's mother, but as soon as he tries to question Andy, he would change his tone and speak to him almost like he's his friend so he can get information out of him. And he even tries to do this despite the fact that Andy's mother is seeing them out. And it's mannerisms like these which makes his performance very authentic, and he comes off like a real cop. And I far preferred him in the original movie as opposed to the remake. Now that being said, I still liked the cop in the remake. When I first heard he was going to be in the movie, I was afraid that in typical Hollywood fashion, they were going to make him the same character as the original, just black. But he was actually a completely different character and was pretty fun to be around. Now the remake includes a couple of other characters for Andy to interact with, and despite being forcefully thrown into the movie, they were a decent addition. For one thing, they actually felt very much like real kids. There comes a point where they hear Chucky swear, so what do? They do exactly what kids would do with something like this. They get it to swear even more. And this is exactly what people did with voice assistants like Siri and stuff when they first started talking to it. Now there was one moment with Andy's friends that I thought was so freaking stupid. For the sake of spoilers, I won't tell you what it is, but there is a scene where one of them starts to suspect Andy, and the reason he decides to suspect him made absolutely no sense. You'll know what I mean when you see the movie. And on a side note, who else thought that this was Jack Black? It isn't, but it looks 100% like him. So, which movie had the superior characters? Well, I think I couldn't have made it more obvious if I tried. It's the original Child's Play. The characters in the new movie are good, but they don't emotionally invest you as much as they did in the original. And when the movie is over, you'll soon forget about them. In the original film, however, as well as being written better, these characters just feel more real. Now the remake has real elements with regards to the great acting, specifically from Gabriel Bateman as Andy, but in the grand scheme of things, you just don't feel for these versions of the characters anywhere near as much as you do for the originals. So the movie with the superior characters is the original Child's Play. Now when it comes to Chucky, both movies are products of their time. In the 1988 movie, he is more of a basic toy, whereas in the 2019 remake, he actually utilizes the more modern technology of our time. And this was very smart. It gives both versions of Chucky different advantages which stay true to the time period he's in. That being said, the remake has Chucky incorporate technology which is absolutely stupid to include in a children's toy, such as giving him the ability to control the thermostat and Ubers. Now logically, Chucky in the original is limited to doing things that only a doll can do, whereas the remake takes some extreme liberties. Now I'm just going to say right off the bat, in terms of appearance, it's no competition. The original Chucky looks so much better. The new one just looks ugly, and no loving parent would get this thing for their kids, which actually makes sense the more I think about it. Now interestingly, the remake actually openly acknowledges that Chucky looks creepy, and they try to show the imperfections in his construction, as there are often times where he stutters and doesn't move smoothly. And although I admittedly did get used to his design as the movie went on, he just didn't look convincing enough to be passed on as a kid's toy. Now the original absolutely nailed Chucky's appearance. He 100% looks like a normal kid's doll, and even when he came to life, it still looked like the same doll with just a person in control of his facial expressions. And there was something so frightening and mysterious whenever the camera would zoom into Chucky whilst he is absolutely still, and it would always be accompanied with this little piece of music. This basic form of filmmaking deceives you, as the visual tells you that this is just a normal doll, but the music is telling you that there is something very wrong about it. And whenever you see things happen, you hear the exact same tune, only it gets louder and more sinister. And it really sets the tone for how dangerous this doll is. And for the first 45 minutes, they don't even show the doll doing anything. We just occasionally see him turn his head, as well as seeing through his point of view. And that was a perfect way of showing us what Chucky is doing throughout the film, whilst keeping his true appearance a mystery. And for the first half of the movie, we are seeing the film unfold from his perspective, and then the second half, we are seeing the rest of the movie from the character's perspective. So the POV in this movie is very well utilized, and the remake goes for a more generic POV. It shows some scenes from Chucky's point of view, but for most of the movie, we are seeing everything from our main character's point of view. Now in both movies, Chucky is a practical effect, and this is especially commendable for the original 1988 movie. The reason is because it had to make use of advanced animatronics, and this sort of technology was in its very early stages back in the time. There were a lot of times where they didn't even know if they would be able to accomplish some of the shots they wanted, and it was all down to trial and error. So they had to put so much time and effort into bringing Chucky to life. Now, I don't know how much animatronics work was done in the remake, but the downside with how movies are made nowadays is that if they need to fix something, rather than fixing it practically when they're filming the movie, they have the ability to artificially fix it in post. But I'm glad to report that I didn't even know when or if they used CGI. The only time I thought they used CGI was in this shot when Chucky smiles. It just came off as fake to me. But other than the couple hiccups here and there, all the practical effects and animatronic work they did with Chucky was very well done and looked great. That being said, I feel like they did so much more with the animatronics in the original Child's Play, both creatively and with the way they shot him. Like, did you know with this shot, they actually dressed up a little person to look like Chucky, and then they had to make a whole replica of this set, which was 30% larger to make the little person look smaller. They even did the same thing when they set him on fire. These were the lengths they would have to go through in order to make these kinds of movies back in the day, and they don't put that kind of effort into making films anymore, and I certainly can't remember any times when we had this level of creativity in the remake. So the design and animatronic work I thought was far superior with the original Chucky. So, what about his personality? Well, the remake uses Chucky in some very mischievous and devious ways, which was very smart. In the middle of the movie, there is one thing he does in the corner of Andy's room when Andy's trying to sleep, and it was downright cruel. In the original, however, Chucky was more maniacal than mischievous, and both of these movies give Chucky very different and very effective personalities. And in the remake, there comes a point where you actually feel sorry for him, and you can't help but wonder if Andy treated him differently or took the time to educate him, then he actually could have been a good guy. That's what makes this version of Chucky tragic and even sympathetic. It's like, what would happen if the Iron Giant or E.T. learned from us and became evil instead of good? It's a twist on the genre that I don't think we have ever seen. Now, one iconic personality trait that they didn't get the new Chucky to do is his iconic laugh. Now, he did it once in this clip right here, but from what I remember, they didn't do it anymore after that. It's not a big complaint or anything, as that wouldn't necessarily make the movie any better, but it's an iconic character trait of Chucky's, and I would have liked to hear more of it. Maybe they didn't do it because Mark Hamill's laugh would be too similar to the Joker. Speaking of which, Mark Hamill did a great job voicing Chucky. I was concerned that he would just use his Joker voice, but thankfully, he doesn't. He primarily uses his own voice, and there was not a single time where I was thinking, damn, they should have used Brad Dourif. Now, that being said, as much as I love Mark Hamill, Brad Dourif made Chucky an icon with his voice, and whereas Mark Hamill did an amazing job, the superior voice still goes to Brad Dourif. Now, whereas both movies execute the killer doll concept very well, they both have one differentiating quality that massively sets them apart from each other. Whereas the original Child's Play told you nothing about the doll and kept it very mysterious, the remake of Child's Play tells you everything about the doll from the very opening of the movie, and that instantly deprives it of the mystery aspect that the original Child's Play expertly maintained for the first 45 minutes. Now, I don't blame the remake for doing this. As a matter of fact, I commend them. We already know what Chucky is. We've had 7 movies for crying out loud. So instead of doing the insulting thing and acting like we don't know, this movie shows us Chucky from a different perspective and tries to make us sympathize with him, and in all honesty, it worked. But as creative as this approach was, it was never going to evoke the same reaction from us that the original did. The original Child's Play toyed with the idea that you buy a toy and it is preloaded with all of these murderous qualities, and there's nothing you can do about it. Your doll is possessed by a murderer and is coming to get you. With the remake, on the other hand, Chucky is more like an uneducated creature who doesn't know what's right and wrong, and it very much takes the concept of characters such as the Iron Giant and E.T. and shows us what would happen if these things just couldn't be taught to be good. That being said, if I was to look at both Chuckies and see which one left the strongest impact, then that would easily go to the original movie. Yes, the new interpretation of Chucky is different and smart, but I much prefer the original version because the creators of the movie took the concept of just a normal doll and made it one of the scariest things ever. And the effect it has had on so many kids and adults over the years is undeniable. And it takes a special talent to take something which is harmless and turn it into something scary. And in the end, having the soul of a vicious murderer in your doll is far more frightening than a computer AI. So the movie with the superior Chucky is the original movie. Now, the horror in the original Child's Play was very smart and clever, and being a product of the 80s, it has the great build-up which was common in horror movies back in the day. The horror in the Child's Play remake, however, was nowhere near as strong with the build-up and tension building of the scares. Now, it was by no means bad, but it definitely felt much less effective with its horror scenes, and it didn't put you on your guard much. That being said, there are some very smart holy shit moments in the movie. One scene in particular where Chucky does something to a dead body, and the sinister nature of what he does really adds to the movie's overall feel and tone. Now, the Child's Play remake has a good amount of humor, but thankfully, it isn't goofy over-the-top humor like what we got in the later Child's Play sequels. No, it actually has a very sinister and dark sense of humor, and anytime the movie made use of it, I had such a good time, and at some points, both me and my brother were laughing so hard. Now, whereas the original Child's Play had an element of humor, the emphasis was still primarily on the horror, whereas the remake sometimes places the emphasis on horror. But then there are other times where it tries to balance it out with some humor, and whichever tone you prefer really comes down to personal preference. But for me, the movie with the superior execution of its horror is the original movie. Now, some of you are going to say that the deaths are better in the remake, so why does the original win the horror round? Well, the deaths certainly are better in the remake, but that isn't what made the movie interesting and scary. It was the tension and build up to the scares that were the most frightening and intense, and I was constantly on the edge of my seat in the original movie, and I found the presentation and build up to the deaths to be a lot more predictable in the remake. Also, a killer doll coming after you is one thing, but when you find out that you set the killer doll on fire and it still comes after you, that's a whole nother level of nightmares for you right there. So yeah, the movie with the superior horror is the original Child's Play. So when you get down to it, both of these movies do a great job at executing their concept, and this is especially impressive for the remake. This is what I think all remakes should do. Don't copy everything from the original movie, and don't lift iconic scenes from the original and then remake them. Change it up and make something different. Give me a reason to watch the same movie again, and I thought the 2019 Child's Play is the first remake to really do that. And movies like the Elm Street remake and Friday the 13th and many others, these are purely done as cash grabs with no inspired thinking behind them. Even Chucky's appearance, for all the problems I had with it, there are some very smart details with his design. Now yes, the way this movie incorporates technology doesn't make sense a lot of times. There are times where it does, and there are times where it doesn't. And you can't help but notice those things when watching the movie, and whether or not you're willing to accept it and let some of those things go, that really comes down to you. But personally, it didn't bother me much. It's time for the scores. Child's Play gets an 8 out of 10, and the Child's Play remake gets a 7. The Achilles heel for this movie is that at its core, it is still a remake. It's taking an already established concept of a killer doll and is reusing it. Now yes, I appreciate the fact that it's an actual killer doll and not a man in a doll's body, but that doesn't take away the fact that a killer doll has come and scared us already, and we are over it now. So although the remake is very entertaining, it doesn't beat the original. But having said that, I can actually see both the original Chucky and this new one coexisting with each other, as they are both massively different from one another, and they can both develop Chucky in completely different ways going forward. The potential is there. Now all we need to know is if they are going to put the effort into the sequels. And something else that's worth pointing out, the remake takes the original Child's Play theme and modernizes it, and it was very good. The rest of the soundtrack for this movie was passable, but the Child's Play theme was very effective and did a great job at setting the tone for the movie, and it even came back a couple times towards the final act of the film. So I'm glad they didn't fully abandon the main theme, as that was a big part of Child's Play's identity. This version of Chucky even gets his own little song, which is sung by Mark Hamill. And you'd think this would be really stupid, but it's actually not. It's actually used to great effect. Whenever he or Andy sings it, it's meant to communicate a certain emotion. It's never used as a random and out of place song, and I gotta commend them for that. So yeah, even though the remake has some great things going for it, the original Child's Play from 1988 is still the best of the Chucky movies. So, that's it for another Versus video, guys. If you liked it, please do give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help in getting my channel noticed, and feel free to click that subscribe button if you haven't already, so you can stay up to date with all my future Versus videos. Thank you very much as always for watching, guys, and I will catch all of you next time. Take care.